I thought you were gonna say like, oh, it's great that they're giving filmmakers a voice.
The filmmaker's voice is the film they made. It's up to the programmers to explain it.
I completely
Good point.
agree. I mean, that's part of our job. Don't take our jobs away from us. Hello and welcome to another episode of No Pundit Intended. As always, I'm Birdeater, joining us from Australia, and I've got my partner in crime, Ron, from the US. And today we have a very special guest. We have Josh Hurtado. Josh is the nicest person on the internet. I've dubbed him the nicest person on the internet that I know. And we go back a long way. But in terms of programming, I guess, now also distributing films, basically championing Indian cinema, I think for me, is the guy responsible for RR crossing over to the US. I think you got your fingers in a lot of pies. I will stop talking about Josh because I'll be fangirling otherwise. I'll let Josh introduce himself. But he's basically joining us because of a very special South by Southwest episode. We're covering the fest, and Josh was able to join in person. He's going to give us the highs and lows of the fest. Mostly highs, I hope, not many lows. So welcome, Josh. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Thank you for having me. I just arrived home today after a long 7 days on the ground in Austin, seeing a lot of really great movies and then a couple of other movies as well. Doing a lot of writing, a lot of walking. It's always a good time down there because it's the weather's nice for a very brief time in Texas. And it always lands during South by Southwest. So I'm happy to be able to go.
Yeah, I mean, South by Southwest feels like a pretty interesting festival. For a long time, it was kind of closed off in terms of access. But I think this year they've opened it up and really tried to make an effort to make it more accessible to people. What are your thoughts? Because for me, it really felt I couldn't afford the festival. It felt really out of my reach in terms of what they were asking for you to attend the festival. But I think they've made an effort to make it more accessible this year, if I'm correct.
I mean, that sounds right. A lot of festivals are doing the kind of inclusivity and diversity programs to help bring new voices in. I wish I could still claim I'm a new voice, but I'm really not anymore at this point. But festivals, but like Southwest and like TIFF are bringing in, are sponsoring critics and writers who are unable to make it for whatever reason, or who are part of underrepresented groups, to come and take part in the festivities. And South by Southwest on its own as a film festival is not an inexpensive proposition if you don't have that kind of sponsorship. So it's always nice to have, a few people who might otherwise not have been able to show up come in and experience the festival with the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, tell us a bit about what you're doing now, because I think you've been involved in so many things, and obviously you've been doing a lot in terms of reviews, distribution work, also, introducing a lot of films at other film festivals. You've been involved as a consultant in, various capacities. So it's difficult to kind of, and also it's such an interesting space because you do have that kind of say and sort of insight to a lot of these things, which, as critics, we don't get to see the other side of how distribution, for example, is working. But you get that access in terms of, or the frustrations, I would say, not just access in terms of how all that is working. So tell us a bit about the spaces you have to manage and you kind of traverse, which are pretty different.
So I initially jumped into film anything was just as a fan. When I started writing at ScreenAnarchy back when we were still Twitch Film, 14 years ago at this point, it was because I was watching Indian films a lot at that time, and no one else really was. And so they wanted to have someone to be able to write about what was upcoming and cool and worth checking out. And so that was kind of where I started. And, pretty quickly after that, it turned into the programming, and then the programming turned into consulting, and then the consulting turned into the Triple R thing. And the Triple R thing is now morphing into more things that I don't really even have a name for anymore. At this point, I feel like I don't even know how to like create a business card because I don't know how you could fit all those labels on one card. And honestly, I'm still kind of figuring out at this point. I have you know I have goals and things that I want to do, but then there are people who are throwing me opportunities that it's hard to walk away from, and so. Uh, right now, there's some consulting and some strategy stuff that I'm working on for films that are trying to either break out in a fashion similar to what Triple R did, or even what I've done for a long time. And the thing that I'm probably best at, I think, not counting Triple R because that was kind of a phenomenon that went beyond our expectations. But the thing that I'm probably best at is, identifying young filmmakers and films that otherwise might have slipped through the cracks from India and bringing them to genre festivals, not just the ones that I've worked like officially on, but also film festivals that are run by other friends and people like that. Like I know, this film or that film would go over great in front of an audience if they just had a chance to see it, and that's one of the things that film festivals are for. They're for putting a film in front of an audience that might not have a chance to see it. And so I've got a little bit of that going on, just trying to talk to people who are making great stuff and say, look, your stuff is great and you have your audience, but what if you had more of an audience? What if you had a different audience? What if we could open this up a little bit? That's what Triple R was just what if we could open this up? Because, there's a world of film fans out there that aren't going to be as keyed in on this particular segment of international cinema the way that I am, and the way that Indians have been for 100 years. And so there's room to grow there. And then eventually, I'm talking to some folks about maybe trying to make a movie, in a background support role, but trying to help them, find financing, put the necessary stuff together to get their films out into the world. People who I know are talented, but just haven't quite got the reach that they need. So too many pies. Honestly, I only have 10 fingers. I've got at least 13 pies going. So I've got to figure out where my time is best spent sometimes. But for right now, I'm just, I have decided to just say yes as often as possible when someone offers me something. And so we'll see how that goes. Maybe I don't flame out immediately.
No, but also because you do have, teaching as well and other things going on. So it just feels like there's 24 hours in a day, and you seem to be maximizing each and every second of that because you've been doing a lot of stuff. So I'm just amazed as a person, as a normal functioning human being, how you're able to do so much and still be alive. Which is
well, you have to let go of that normal functioning thing. You're like that's a pie in the sky goal that I'm never going to hit. The 24 hours, I'm negotiating on those, trying to get another few in there. But yeah, I mean, I don't sleep much. I'll tell you that. And a lot of like you said, I do teach in a public high school, so my weekdays are spoken for. So all of the other stuff that I do is weekends. It's early mornings, as you mentioned. I work a lot with people in India, so the time difference there makes it complicated. So I'm doing conference calls at 6 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night because that's when everyone's awake. And so it's a challenge. It's a juggling act for sure.
Obviously, you've kind of consulted with Fantastic Fest. You've introduced films there a lot, and you've been involved in genre films and film festivals a bit. How do you think South by Southwest has kind of evolved over the years as a genre film festivals, or giving space for genre films? Because that is something I keep hearing from a lot of people. When I was there with Anurag Kashyap in Sydney, that's the one major gripe that he had, and he's spoken about it, I think, quite frequently in terms of how genre films are not given the same importance at film festivals in terms of their pedigree. So what do you feel about that? Because you're involved in the genre space for a long time, and that's also kind of your baby, I suppose.
It is. Well, South by Southwest has had a history of a strong genre program, at least. I mean, I've been going there for I've been going since 2013 to South by Southwest in person. And before that, even, they've had some really strong genre programming when they were sort of, at the time, they were consulting or partnering with Fantastic Fest, which also takes place in Austin, on their Midnighters section, which is like the late night horror movie, sort of generally speaking, high energy film.
Like TIFF's Midnight Madness, kind of
Like
same
Midnight
vibe.
Madness, yeah. Similar to Midnight Madness. So Midnight Madness has 10 films that they program. South by Southwest generally has about 10 films they program in the same section. Then you've got Sundance has a similar section, a midnight section as well. Several of the big, at least in North America, have those kind of like blocked off genre film sections. But they are kind of still seen as like the stepchild of film festivals. At least in terms of those, like, major film festivals that have a genre film program, a smaller genre film program, as opposed to the genre film festival circuit, which is it runs parallel, but those are dedicated entirely to those. And, genre films are films that, generally speaking, make money. Like, if you're able to get one that's halfway decent and get it to a distributor who knows what they're doing, you can recoup budgets pretty quickly, because they tend to be relatively low budget films. And with the right marketing and sales, they can get their money back. So it's depending on there's always variables involved in that, but we are just as much genre film fans as, I'll put myself in that seat. We are as serious film fans as anyone else is. It's just that our tastes are slightly skewed. They're a little bit different.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make us any better or worse or smarter or dumber or whatever, in most cases, than anyone else. And South by Southwest specifically has done a very good job over the last several years of programming some really solid stuff, some stuff that's done some traveling and has gotten some critical acclaim. And some of the films that could be considered genre films have sort of seeped into the other sections, like the regular narrative film sections of the program, and done really well. For example, if you look just 2 years ago, I was at South by Southwest for the world premiere of Everything Everywhere All at Once, which, if you look at that film, that is a genre film. It is an action, science fiction, sort of fantasy film that fits squarely in the genre space. And, obviously did pretty well. So there's room for these kinds of films. And, people like me, I'm not a big follower of the Oscars, unless, last year I had R in there, so I had my own reasons. But, in general, I don't particularly care unless I have like a horse in the race or a filmmaker who I really respect, getting recognized, like, when Shape of Water won a few years ago. That was great, because I've always felt like Guillermo del Toro is one of us. Like, he's making these highfalutin movies, but he's one of us at heart. Daniels those are our guys. Those are that's the kind of stuff that I'm always in. And I like the other movies. Like, I loved Moonlight. Moonlight was one of my favorite movies that year. Like, I like other movies also. I have weird issues in general with trying to objectively judge art. And so if you ever look, and I have plenty of lists of my favorite things. Like, I make my lists of favorite movies every year, like a lot of people do. But I'm very conscious about not ranking them, because, like, I feel like for me personally, that degree of scrutiny or competition, it just doesn't compute for me personally. And so, except for R is the best, but everything else kind of fits. Like, there are. And I've made a list of my favorite Indian films or favorite films for the last 10 or 15 years. And I always say, like, I never say it's the best films of that year. It's just my favorite films of that year, because best, again, feels like an objective thing, which I'm not qualified to talk about. Like, I can only say what I like, and what I like is very frequently not what anybody else likes. So
were you similarly following the Oscars when Nightmare Alley was contending, or just to name like a couple other genre titles that have done pretty well at the Oscars over the past 10 or so years? Mad Max Fury Road, Get Out, Promising Young Woman, Dune. This is just a sort of a general question I have when we talk about the Oscars and their declining ratings. It's like, does it, people think that if you just nominate more like commercially friendly films like Joker, I guess there's this belief that it'll make people engaged, it'll give them a horse in the race. But I find that maybe a lot of people like yourself who love movies, it's not that they're not invested in the film that are nominated. They just don't like the horse race. Like it doesn't matter if you nominate their favorite movie of the year. They don't enjoy like watching this competition between movies because maybe they have an objection to ranking art. Maybe it's something else. But so I guess I'm just curious, did you care more when Nightmare Alley was nominated, when Get Out, Promising Young Woman, Joker, when those movies were in contention?
I mean, I I didn't necessarily. I mean, it takes a lot, and I'm just one person, so my opinion is just my own. But I think a lot of it does go along in the last, at least 7 or 8 years with declining theater attendance. The increase of streaming numbers. People engage with films differently now than they used to. The Oscars it's a big party to celebrate all these great things that happened over the course of the year, and sometimes there have been years where the nominations weren't terribly audience friendly. They weren't big populist films. Just over the last 5 years, we had Nomadland and Coda both winning the big award, and those were, I mean, fine films, but how many people actually saw them? Are those films?
Well, hang on. Sorry. I think, well, with Nomadland, you have to just throw in the qualifier that not many big sort of populist films could have come out that year because of the pandemic. But
yeah,
my bigger beef with what you just said, Coda is doesn't matter how many people saw it. That is it came
but
out
that
on
affects
Apple
viewing
and
that affects viewing numbers, is what I'm saying. Is like, if that's what the Academy, which is, again, I've had this conversation with many people. The Academy is not a thing. It is a group of thousands of people. So if that what those thousands of people are voting on, that's all fine and good. And the movie is great. And there are lots of great movies that win Oscars, and there are some terrible ones that win Oscars also. It's there's a balance to be struck that has not yet, in the last several years, in terms of making the Oscars a bigger event culturally that it, like it used to be, like it was 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, when it was like the big thing that everybody cared about, and
possible we're just past that stage because
it could be, but the Oscars are
fragmented popular culture has become. Because I don't know, were the ratings higher like when Joker was nominated? Because I think Coda is totally like a populist crowd pleaser, but if we're going to judge that based on like how many people saw the movie, and obviously with Coda, it's just the release was part of that, not really something inherent to the film. But like, were numbers higher when Joker was nominated? Like, did people, because they cared about the movie, did that like suddenly invest them in the race? Because I do think every year we call the Academy elitist, but over and over again they disprove that charge.
All these things are possible. It seems like it's the size of the Oscars and what the producers of the Oscars are attempting to do, or have been attempting to do for the last several years, is to bring a new audience. It's what anybody wants to do, with their film, with their event. They want more people. It's what Netflix wants. It's what all these Amazon Prime wants. It's what all these businesses want. They can't stagnate or they die. And so It like I said, I don't think that the Oscars have necessarily found the balance between, you know, presenting an event that is big enough to justify the cost that they are putting into it, uh, uh, in terms of getting that money back with ad revenue, which is how they have to do all that stuff. That's why all this stuff works. And, you know, they're working on that. They need to make the show worth watching. The show is what the thing is. Like that's what the Oscars is. It's the show. And so, like last year, you can say I only watched last year because I had the thing in the movie in there. But you know, last year was worth it, and a lot of people say that you know the performance of Triple R was a highlight. You know, and that's the kind of thing that you turn in for. This year it was the performance with Ryan Gosling and the Barbie song. Like that's what people are talking about afterwards. Like you need to have those moments guaranteed. And you know, a couple of years before that, they had the whatever the what was that thing the popular thing that people voted on, and it was like some DC bullshit.
Oh, and Zack Snyder and ended
Yeah,
up
like
winning.
yeah, and like I'm
I
sure
think
everyone on
everyone
stage.
assumed that that award was created so that Spider-Man No Way Home could walk away that night a winner, but
With
then it
something.
ended up going to like this random Zack Snyder thing.
I mean, you can't fuck with the
What was
internet.
it
The internet
called?
will get you. You know. So, uh, you know, it's part of it is, you know, they're putting on a big show. Everyone's wearing their fanciest, most expensive clothes, and people want to watch and see like what you know, what everyone is wearing and what crazy thing is going to happen. Is John Cena going to walk out naked again? Is there going to be this, you know, this big performance? Like those are the kind of things that the Oscar presentation has to do to sort of justify the massive cost of what they're doing. You know, they need stunts basically to make this stuff happen. And you know, if you have 10, you know, that's why they expanded the best picture pool from 5 to 10. And so they have more people like who are engaged with one of those films instead of having 5 films where you may not have heard of 4 of them if you're just the average dude in, you know, in the Midwest. You know, that's how you get a Fury Road in there. That's how you get something else in there. I would have loved
Well,
Fury Road to
Fury
run.
Road, sorry, just because George Miller was nominated for Best Director and the movie was like so wide, like across categories recognized, I have a hunch like it was a top 5 contender that year, even though that may not have been the kind of movie that got nominated, you know, prior to 2009, the first year. Well, the 2010, but for the films that came out in 2009, may not have been the typical sort of thing to get nominated, but just given how overwhelmingly like recognized it was, yeah, we still would have gotten that film in there.
Possible. Entirely possible. But 10 made it certain. That's what I'm saying.
I want to move away from this Oscars conversation
Oh,
a little bit.
One practical thing I want to throw in.
Yeah, sure.
It's so hard. I don't know, maybe this is a short-sighted comment, but every year it's so hard to find a legitimate live stream of the Oscars unless you have like some live packet like YouTube Live or Hulu Plus Live TV. And it's like if they made that just available to anyone on YouTube, they would still make a ton in ad revenue, right? Like they can still use those same segments for ads. And then with YouTube, it's even like, I don't know, personalized ads. It's not just the general sort of thing or like the more local ad that you see when you're watching like Channel 7. So I don't know, that might just be a very small kind of practical adjustment that doesn't require serious modification to the ceremony, but it will allow like anyone to watch it, not just the people who are going to pay like, I don't know, whatever, like astronomical price, like YouTube live TV costs.
Agreed.
We should move on to South by Southwest, which is why we're here.
Yeah.
But as always, when you get 3 people talking about movies, we go into tangents. So for our Oscar tangent, sorry about that. Now we are back on topic with South by Southwest. South by Southwest launched in Sydney here last year, and my personal experience was it is so exclusive that I don't think it was catering to the people it was meant to cater. And then I was looking at the ticket prices or the wristband prices, and I'm just like, I don't know who's going to actually afford these things. Do you think people in the arts actually have that kind of money to shell out $1,000 for a wristband to attend a local festival conference? I don't know. I mean, I know it's a technology and a gaming conference as well, so it does appeal to a certain section of tech bros and, a sort of corporate sort of enterprise. But just for the film kind of section, I just thought it was still, there weren't a lot of talks in there, a lot of, engagement, but the kind of people who could actually afford to attend these talks were not the kind of people who actually were film fans. There were people who could afford the ticket. So you were kind of priced out of attending a major festival in your own city. What do you think? Did something change this year, given you attended in person? Did they make a conscious effort to make it more, I guess, price accessible?
I mean, I don't know that there's necessarily been any sort of attempt at that part of it. The film badges are still pretty pricey. When I do run into people, because part of it is you're interacting with, whether you are trying to or not, you're interacting with people who are there for the different strands of the festival. So, South by Southwest has the huge music portion. They have the tech portion. There's an education portion. There's all these different sections on top of the film section. The film section just happens to run the entire length of the film of the festival's window. It starts the first day and it ends the last day, whereas music starts a few days in and text ends a few days before it's over. So it's one of the things where if you're there for the entire film festival, you're just going to be interacting with people because you're on the same shuttles, moving from venue to venue. You're going to the same places to pick up tickets or whatever. So you kind of interact. And it's very similar. A lot of the people that I ran into who were there, with corporate sponsorship, or there with their own venture capitalist business, or there with their own, tech businesses or something like that. And I'll be, perfectly honest. If I wasn't there attending as press, there's no way I can afford to go to South by Southwest. It is pretty pricey. And I mean, if you're there for the film festival and you don't have the obligations that I have, which is that I get to go see all these great movies, and that's wonderful, but I also have to go back home and write about them until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and then get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and write some more. Then, it's work. It's not all fun and games. It's mostly fun and games. But there is the work part because, first of all, I'm there because I want to write about films. I want to tell people what's good and what's coming up. And I also want to get invited back, and so in order to do that, I have to provide evidence that when I was there, I was doing what I told them I was going to be doing. So that's why I'm now like 15 reviews deep, and I've got 4 more lined up before the next few days are up, just so I can say, hey, look, you guys, I did what I said I was going to do. Can I come back again? But it is pricey. Austin, though, it's an expensive city to live in. It has, over the last, decade, it's drawn a ton of tech business there. It used to be known as this, it used to be known as the weird city, keep Austin weird. That's the motto of the town. And over the last 10 years, it's grown by leaps and bounds. Obviously we've got that Tesla guy there now. So that's happening, and that's brought a lot of other businesses to town. And so just based on the people who can afford to live in Austin, they can also kind of afford to go to South by Southwest in lots of cases as well. So, but Austin also has one of the healthiest film scenes in the country. If you're looking at like big film cities, you've got LA, New York, and Austin. And those are the 3, those are the biggest 3 film cities in the country, bar none. Those 3, if you're looking to find something going on any night of the week, those are the places to go. And so, yeah, I mean, there are plenty of locals there because I know I have a lot of friends who moved to Austin just to be a part of the film scene. And that goes back, to the beginning of the Draft House 20 years ago, or 20, whatever it is, 25 years ago now.
All right. Let's get into the movies. I'm really excited to hear about a couple of them in particular.
For everyone who's watching, we've linked Josh's ScreenAnarchy profile, so you can go and actually read all his in-depth reviews. If we don't cover in-depth enough, you can go and read his take, and that's all great. So we'll be covering all those links will be in the description. You can reach each individual review. But I think what will be best is to maybe start with some of your honorable mentions or some of your films that you felt were good, but maybe not, your absolute highlights.
The Midnighter section is kind of where I focus. That's where all the late night films show. South by Southwest also has a very cool program called Visions. And Visions is where they have a lot of their more experimental, sort of not quite genre films, but unusual enough that they don't fit in the regular narrative program, or that, your average moviegoer would be a little bit put off by, just because structurally or aesthetically, they might not be as easy to get through. So those are two sections that I love the most, because that's where the challenging stuff happens, and that's where I want to see something new. One of the films that I really liked, I liked quite a lot, was actually an Australian film. It was Birdeater, which I know has played in Australia a couple of times now at a couple of festivals. This was its international premiere. And it's terribly uncomfortable to sit in. It is the kind of film that watching it with a partner would be, again, a bit of a challenge, and something that might be uncomfortable for either one or both of you. It's about, a stag party where a man decides to bring his fiancée to this stag party out at a remote cabin, and they start drinking and drugging, and then things start to come out that they possibly don't want to come out, and the nature of the relationship is outed, and it's a very uncomfortable watch. So I like that. I like discomfort in films. I like sitting in the sort of discomfort in a group setting. Like, I love it when it's with a bunch of people. That's my favorite. Just kind of sitting there in an uncomfortable spot with 100 other people is fun for me. Anything that gets a big reaction in either direction is something that I'm immediately going to be at least interested in. I'm okay being on the negative side, just as much as I'm okay being on the positive side, but I'm always eager to sort of talk about why that stuff happens.
It's interesting you talk about Birdeater being an uncomfortable watch for the audience, because it won the Audience Award at Sydney Film Festival last year. And it's not the kind of film I would think is a very crowd-pleasing Audience Award-winning film. So it's interesting how an uncomfortable film can also elicit memorable. It can stay in the audience's memory and kind of win that award, because usually the Audience Award winners are the ones, the crowd-pleasing films, the American fiction, the very obviously appealing, simple films that we can say that, these are obviously geared to win an Audience Award. But this is exactly the opposite. So it's interesting to see that this won that, and now obviously the more uncomfortable themes, the undertones are coming out, and it's not exactly the film you would go and fit in with a partner, like you really said.
Agreed.
Since we're touching on Australian films, I think the other one I wanted to touch upon was the Moogai, which I'm interested to hear your reactions on as well, because that also has kind of played here and is sort of now coming over to the US and other festivals internationally. What are your thoughts on that one?
I wish I liked it more. I think there are great ideas in the Moogai, and it's a story that it's certainly worth being told. Having done, after watching the film, doing a little bit of reading on my own to try and sort of contextualize it, because it does deal with something tragic that happened in Australia for many, many, many years. But it's the kind of thing that a lot of people outside of Australia, myself included, don't really have any idea about, which is, the removal of indigenous children to white families for years and years and years in an attempt to assimilate them into the white culture of Australia. And so it sort of personifies that government program in the form of the Moogai, a folk beast, the child stealing folk beast, among other things. It does other things as well, but the movie focuses on the child stealing part. And like I said, it's a great story, and there are the the story of it is good, but the execution lacks, and that kind of sinks it, in my opinion. Which is a shame because there's a lot of good stuff in there. The lead performance by the lead actress is wonderful. Her name I've forgotten already, but she's wonderful, and she commits 100%. She does really great work. All the actors do great work. It's just that the script is not quite there. Not quite there. Um, it's very clumsy and obvious about the points that it's making. It doesn't trust the audience to connect the dots enough. It insists on explaining things that people could pretty easily figure out if they weren't shouted at us. A lot of the dialogue is the thing I've been telling people is that the dialogue is more like diatribe. Like it turns into, the things that don't exist in conversational, speaking, are sort of said like platitudes are part of the script. It's not subtle in any way, and it doesn't do the actors any favors because they're doing their best with this hokey dialogue, and it just feels really uncomfortable and sort of amateurish when it shouldn't. Like it really shouldn't. And maybe that's because it's a first-time filmmaker. He did really well with the short this was based on, and everyone seems to love the short. I have not seen it myself. The short film, The Moogai, was very popular, and a lot of people were excited to see the feature because of the short success. And, maybe he just wasn't ready to make a feature. Maybe he didn't have enough people going through the script and saying, you know what, we can tighten this up. We can make this a better film if we just, adjust the dialogue here and there to make it feel more natural. But that doesn't really happen. There are other minor quibbles about the film, but the big thing for me was that the dialogue didn't suit the action on screen, and it made the film feel like it didn't trust its audience, and I don't like that. I like it when the film lets me figure out what it's about, rather than just telling me what it's about.
What I'm getting in terms of a through line is that a lot of films in the lineup this year are using magical realism as a kind of, a symbol of sorts in their horror gothic storytelling way. So, magical realism really becomes a genre element to kind of tell your horror story. This kind of, is that what you've noticed that filmmakers are kind of leaning into a bit more in terms of not making their themes a lot more obvious, but also giving it a fresh new element and take of the usual horror tropes that you need to rely on in a lot of films?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you're looking at a festival film, there is, and it's seeped its way out into the mainstream as well. There's one of the things that's been a big trend. I mean, it's not really a trend; it's always kind of been there, but it's become overwhelming in the last few years. Is the idea that horror films, again, where my main focus usually is, tend to base themselves in some sort of trauma. The horror comes from a trauma, and so the trauma must be explained. The trauma must be dug into, and so it's looking for not just like the hack and slash stuff. They want to have a meaning behind that, which is fine, and when done well is really good. But it can become overwhelming. The sort of trauma porn that happens in horror movies these days. Sometimes I just want to see somebody get his head cut off. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to see good, gory special effects. I want to see people getting chased through the woods. Like sometimes that's great. And if they're able to do the other stuff, the trauma, the explanation of the whys and wherefores, the emotional connection to the characters, and they could do that without sacrificing the energy level of the film, that kind of stuff, all the better for it. Films can say something and be fun at the same time. And I feel like that's something that doesn't happen as often as it may be used to. It happens, and there are plenty of examples of it. But at a film festival, you tend to see films that are leaning sort of in the more, artistic realm. I mean, they're film festivals. That's kind of what we expect out of a film festival film. And less of the sort of just, I don't want to say generic, but more just simple, like a simple film where people are going and doing crazy stuff. And you just want to watch crazy stuff. And I enjoy those films greatly. There are several films in this year's South by Southwest that do utilize the sort of trauma effectively in ways that I really, really thought worked, and were able to convey it without being didactic. But sometimes the explanation overwhelms things, and it becomes sort of a slog.
Fair to say that this is the type of movie we're talking about when we use this new trendy term, elevated horror.
Yeah, often,
It's
and
not I usually associate that with like stylistic aesthetic choices, but I guess narratively, more often than not, like, yeah, that horror is based in some sort of trauma. But then you think about some of the horror movies that also traffic in this kind of trauma porn, like Smile, and it's like there's no way you can call that elevated.
There are films that don't utilize it well. I think one of the big examples for me of a major film franchise that I think really crapped the bed in the last few years was the last uh, iteration of the Halloween films. Like, I did not like those last three Halloween films. I thought that they misunderstood what people were looking for when they go to see a Halloween film, and they kept aggressively misunderstanding it more every time they made a new film. And so it's like there was no course correction there. There wasn't like, oh well, we made this film and it wasn't as successful as we wanted it to be. Let's try and figure out why that is, and steer it back towards where we think it's going to be. It's like, oh well, people didn't like it. Let's make it worse. And then when Halloween ends, it's like, make it even worse. We'll take all the things people like away from the movie, make it this whole other movie. And so, and the elevated horror thing for the people like in the horror, universe, elevated horror is just a new word for things that we've known have existed for, 50, 60, 70 years. Like a lot of those, like The Exorcist these days would be called elevated horror. A lot of these films that existed all these years, would be considered elevated horror because they have a story. It feels like that's all it really takes is a story and like being shot well, which is, you go back to Halloween, you go back to Exorcist, you go back to The Omen. Like these are horror movies that are made with intention, that are mainstream films that have real stories that are not just like, and no shade on these films because I love them, but like it's not a Friday the 13th film where it's just like, okay, these dumbasses went into the woods and now Jason's going to go pack them all up while they have sex. I love that stuff too. In fact, I love that stuff more than some of the other stuff. But elevated horror, it's a new word for something that's existed for a very long time. It's Columbusing horror is what it is. It's these things have always been there. And a lot of my films are not my films that I love or films that I claim as like, these are the ones that I'm really, I pour my heart out to, would fall into that elevated horror, under that whole elevated horror label. Films like, Tigers Are Not Afraid. Like that's elevated horror, if you want to call it that. It's also just a great horror movie. It's a wonderful film. And then there's something that there's no way you could call it elevated horror, something like One Cut of the Dead, which is not elevated really in any way, but it's amazing. And those two films, back to back, are going to appeal to a very broad audience because they're both just good. And, One Cut of the Dead is fun. Tigers Not Afraid is just like, it's what I call it, it's like a real movie. Like it's like a movie that you could take anyone to and they would say, oh, well, that was a movie. Like, I love that movie. Like Godzilla, the new Godzilla movie, Godzilla Minus One, is a real movie. You can take people who are not Godzilla fans to Godzilla Minus One and they will love it because it's a real movie with real things happening in it. And is that elevated? I mean, it talks about the trauma of post-war Japan. It does all the things that elevated horror movies do, but I haven't seen that label applied to that film. Maybe it has, and I haven't been watching. But, these are things that horror movies have done for years. And, in the festival space, you see it probably more frequently because people do know that they're pitching to, especially at a mainstream festival with just a midnight section or a genre section, you're going to see a lot more of that stuff being pitched in there.
I know, Josh, I said that I was going to let you kind of pick the order that we talk about these films in, but because we're now in this conversation about elevated versus just kind of like your direct meat and potatoes horror. I know that you saw It's What's Inside,
Mhm.
and that was a buzzy title out of Sundance. I think it was, I'm not sure that it was the most expensive acquisition, but it was up there. Netflix bought it for like a pretty impressive sum. And the thing I kept hearing about it out of Sundance, that it's just like a really fun romp that totally spits in the face of any kind of pretense.
Yeah, that feels like a pretty reasonable way of describing it. It's not particularly high-minded. It doesn't really have a lot necessarily to say, as as we look at other kind of horror films that kind of want to tell us something about ourselves. We were admonished in the screening not to give away any of the plot points at all, which is hard because the plot begins right away. But it's a lot of fun. I will say that it's one of those films, not unlike Birdeater, where watching it with a partner could get uncomfortable if your relationship is not rock solid. Like if you've got any kind of hesitation about who
Both
you're
take
who you're
place
spending your
at
life with.
bachelor parties, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so it's kind of it's like a it's a group of college friends get together the night before one of them is getting married, and then they play a party game, and the party game goes wrong. So it's just that the party game they're playing is very unusual, and it sort of leans into a sort of fantasy science fiction aspect that then creates a lot of interactions between people that they're not used to having, and there's secrets being told and things like that, kind of like in Birdeater. But it's more of a fun thing, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. I had no idea about anything going in. I hadn't really read anything about it. I just knew it was in the Midnighter section. There was only one screening. It was the last film I saw yesterday before I left the festival. And I was like, I'm going to see all the Midnighters, so I have to go see this one. And so I went and saw it. And I had a whole lot of fun with it. The director seemed like he had a lot of fun with it too. One thing that I do kind of rue about the film is not the film itself. It's that because it was purchased by Netflix, it's not going to be able to get a theatrical release in all likelihood. And it really played well with an audience. It's the kind of film, some films you can get away with watching at home and you're not really missing much in terms of, being in a room full of people. You can get pretty much the same experience out of watching it by yourself. This is not one of those films. I believe that, there were a lot of big laughs, a lot of big reactions in the film, that I I regret the fact that I will probably not get to have that experience again, and that's kind of a bummer. As good as the film is, and I think people are going to really enjoy it when they see it, they would have enjoyed it more in a full house. That's all I'm saying. That's kind of what we did with Triple R. Like Triple R is great when you watch it at home. It's 10 times greater when you're in a room full of people. There's a communal aspect that really takes over in some films that just can't be replicated by watching it by yourself or with your partner or your kids on a couch. There's something to be said for the theatrical experience in the right circumstances, which is becoming harder to do these days.
Definitely. I wanted to touch upon, a couple of maybe survival thrillers as well, which played. I'm particularly thinking of Benjamin Brewer's Arcadian with Nicolas Cage and his twin sons. Is this going back tried and tested territory, or just doing something new and fresh with the genre that we're not expecting? Because I was in two minds when I sort of saw what the spiel was, and I'm like, has this been done before? Am I going to be interested? But then I read your review, and I'm like, oh my god, okay, this is kind of new.
It's not necessarily breaking a whole lot of ground, but I think it does what it does really well. And sometimes that's all you need to make something stand out. It's a survival thriller. It's about Nick Cage and his sons, and they live in a world that is on the wrong end of some sort of apocalyptic event, and they are among a small group of survivors who must stay inside at night because at night bad things are going to try and get them. That's the basic log line of the film. And so a lot of the film is establishing the relationships between these characters, how they've coped with this reality that is found them, the world they find themselves in. Cage was around before this big ending event happened, and his boys were not, so they've only ever known this life. And there is a lot of relationship building that makes us care about them when things go haywire, and I think that's very important. You need to have that kind of connection with the people. Otherwise, when they die or might die, things you want to care about them. Otherwise, the film becomes less important as it goes along. And it really, really helps that the things that are trying to kill them are just absolutely terrifying. I've watched a lot of monster movies, and I have not seen monsters like these before, and they scared the shit out of me. And there's there are not a lot of movies that can really do that. And it's a combination of things. It's the design of the monsters, it's the way the monsters act, it's the audio, it's the visual, it's everything. Like they created this thing where it feels there's a great amount of tension in the film. When you genuinely feel like anyone is vulnerable to be lost in the moments when things go really badly. So no, it's not breaking any particularly new ground, but it does what it does really well, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I love a good monster, and these were really good monsters. And they do some cool stuff you're not expecting, and they're hard to put down. Like all the things you want. You want your villains to be like tough. Like if they're just a bunch of wusses that lay right down, then that's no fun. You want them to be tough, and you want there to be genuine dread and fear that maybe not everyone's going to get out okay. I really, really enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. Again, a lot of these films I went into knowing almost nothing, because that's kind of how I prefer to do it. And one of the things, and this is just a personal pet peeve of mine, that I actually talked to a few people on the ground about. It's really in the weeds for film festival goers. So if you haven't been to a festival, you might not be familiar with this. But when you go to a film festival, you're generally giving a program that outlines all the films in the festival and gives you a brief summation of what you're going to be seeing. Like what is the film about, right? And for South by Southwest, and I don't know if this is new or if it's happened for years, but I only noticed it this year. The program blurbs for each film, the like little paragraph or whatever they give you to get the idea of what the film is you're going into, were written by the films themselves and not by the programming staff, which I thought was very odd, because sometimes films don't know how to talk about themselves. I mean, that's one of the programmers' jobs, is to try and like not only get the films, but then explain why they got the films to the audience. Like that's part of what we do, to contextualize the films, to give people a reason to want to come out to them. And so sometimes the film festival blurbs aren't great, because they're not written by people who are trying to sell tickets to their movies. They're written to explain to people who are programming the movies, which is a different audience. And so that was kind of odd to read some of the blurbs, and then go into the movies and say, that's not what I watched at all. Like what you wrote is not what I watched. It was kind of unusual that way. And I think Arcadian was one where there could have been, had it had a better description of the program, I think it would have gotten people more excited, myself included. I mean, I was going to see it because it was a Nick Cage movie, and it said it was like a post-apocalyptic thing, and like that's enough to sell me. But I think it could have been explained better without giving anything.
No, that's totally
I thought you were going to go in a different direction with that. I thought you were going to say like, oh, it's great that they're giving filmmakers a voice.
The filmmaker's voice is the film they made. It's up to the programmers to explain it.
I completely agree. I mean, that's part of our job. Don't take our jobs away from us.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking to two film programmers, so you have passionate views about this. Where do you feel the blurb made an error? Like, what's the key thing you would have changed about it? How would you have contextualized it differently?
If you're trying, it's a survival thriller, a survival horror movie eventually by the end, and I think it would have been in this particular case, good to mention the fact that there are these terrifying monsters. I don't think that's too much of a spoiler, that there are terrifying monsters in the movie. I'm in. Like, that's for people who are fans of creature features or fans of, rampaging animals or whatever the thing is. They want to see, those kinds of things on screen. I think just that little bit, just add that little bit, and not like they just stay at home one night. The blurb was about how the family has to stay inside one night, and one night one of the kids is out and Nick Cage has to go get him. But it doesn't say why. Like, it doesn't say why it's bad that the guy's outside. And it's not like you have to explain every little bit of it, but just say something terrifying is coming to get him. Enough. It's a little bit of a tweak.
Yeah, because that just sounds like it could be a minimalist, like post-apocalyptic human drama or something.
Like maybe acid rain falls at night. Like, we don't know. It could be anything. That doesn't make it a monster movie, and it's a monster movie. And I wanted, like, that would have been cool to know.
Any other kind of movies that we've missed that you felt that they have an honorable mention before we move on to our sort of heavy hitters in terms of your top five?
Sure. There are a couple. So a few of them that were in the visions section, which, as I said earlier, the experimental section were really cool, like sort of low budget science fiction things. There's a film called Desert Road, which is about a woman who crashes her car and is trying to get help, and discovers that no matter which direction she goes in, she always ends up back at her car. And it's
cool.
sort of a film about temporal displacement. It's about loss and about overcoming loss and moving forward in life. Like, that's the overall grand theme of the film. But it's done in a very clever way that I hadn't seen before. That was really cool. So Desert Road is again, low budget. Because of the premise, they're able to use basically three sets. There's the car, there's a gas station, there's a factory. And she just walks past them, a million times in different directions, and always ends up back at her car. And it's about how, if you are unable to get past this sort of disappointment or loss in your life, then you're going to end up stuck. And it's about finding a way past that. So I thought that was really cool. There was a horror film called Family, which I really, really, really liked. Which is about a little girl whose father is dying of cancer. They moved to a new town to be close to medical assistance they weren't able to get in their old home. She has this little birdhouse, and she has this, thought that if she calls out to the universe, they'll send a spirit to protect the family. So she makes this call to the universe to help protect her family and heal her father, whatever. And something reaches back, and it's not helpful. And like, it's a bad force that like turns the whole family crazy. And it was cool because, and we heard from the filmmaker beforehand. He grew up in a home where his father was dying of cancer when he was young. And he said that it felt like a horror movie. He felt like he was living in a horror movie, when that was happening when he was young. And so he sort of turned that into a film. And that is one where the filmmaker's trauma really did translate into a really good film where you understand, but it's not pedantic. It's explained in the way that it should be explained, which is by the action of the film. And my favorite part of it is there's this really tremendous performance by Ruth Wilson as the little girl's mother, who she turns in like a crazy, just what feels over the top in the moment performance, but it's really just captivating, like a Toni Collette in Hereditary, something in that level. And she really, really, really goes for it. And I don't know if you guys saw this film last year, and it didn't get great reviews, but I really loved it.
Before you say it, I want to guess, because I remember seeing this tweet, and as you were speaking, I'm like, wait, is Josh the one who tweeted that? And even when you were talking about Ruth Wilson's over the top, okay, I'm too big of a lead-in, especially if I'm wrong. Are you about to compare this performance to Lizzie Kaplan's in Cobweb?
Yeah. Okay. Lizzie Kaplan in Cobweb. That was me. Yes. Lizzie Kaplan in Cobweb, is a different kind of crazy, but she's in that movie, which is a kind of a diversion, but she's living in a different world than the rest of the movie, which I really, really love. She's putting in this very arch performance as this mother who is very protective of her child, and there's a good reason for it. You learn later in the film, but she's acting like 10 levels above everyone else in the film. She's putting in capital A acting in that movie, and Ruth Wilson does the same thing. She puts in some capital A acting
I think
moments in the last half hour.
Star was also really good and creepy in Cobweb.
Hopefully it gets some respect in the coming years, because it didn't get the respect it deserved when it came out, because I think it's got some really good stuff in it.
Had some really good production design and just some like individual shots of shadows that like I think I forgot most of the movie, and like I really thought it was mediocre, but for a mediocre movie, it really like etched some of its images into my brain.
Sometimes that's enough, you know? But those are some of the, and then there's the third one I was going to say is a movie called So Torn, which was the feature debut for a kid named Freddie McDonald. It is a Swiss set movie in English about a seamstress whose business is failing after her mother died, who had owned the business beforehand. She takes a job and with this very high maintenance woman, finishing up her wedding dress, she loses a button, has to go find the button. And on her way to go get a replacement button from her shop, she comes across a drug deal gone bad, and she must decide what to do about it. And it's kind of like a Run Lola Run situation in which she has three choices. She can either commit the perfect crime by stealing from this drug deal that's gone bad. She can call the police, or she can, just keep driving, pretend it didn't happen. And the film shows you all three courses that she could have taken and the end result of each of them. It's like Run Lola Run, but kind of with an Amelie sort of aesthetic to it. As a seamstress, the character utilizes her skill with a needle and thread to do all kinds of weird, cool, sort of Rube Goldberg-esque devices to take care of the people, or to get rid of the people that are chasing her, or to try and escape when she gets in trouble. There's a lot of really cool things happening in the film. And I just thought it was a lot of fun. And I feel like I'm hoping it becomes one of the films that sort of breaks out, because I heard nothing about the film or filmmaker beforehand. And it feels like this is something that people are going to want to see, because it's very, very creative. And that's not as common as it could be. I thought it was really a really cool thing to see. And I would like to see the filmmaker do more stuff.
No, that's now on my sort of list, because that was not something that was actually, so thanks for that. Now, if I could have seen it pop up anywhere, or maybe hopefully bring it to Sydney. Fingers crossed, we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
But also moving on to our sort of highly anticipated list now. I'm really keen to see Immaculate, because it's coming out within a week in Australia. It's coming out on 21st, so pretty soon. So starring Sydney Sweeney in a sort of dramatic role, I guess. And I think we're at that sort of crossroads right now where people are not quite sure what to make of Sydney Sweeney, especially after like Anyone But You kind of blew up. And it is, even though it's shot in Australia, but I think no one expected that movie to make that much money. And it's still playing in theaters in Australia, which is insane, given that they brought it back for Valentine's Week. They brought it back for Valentine's Week, and now it's still in theaters. So that movie is going
that thing
gangbusters. So anyway, and now after Madam Web, which kind of did what it did, I think people are kind of unsure what to make of Sydney as a city, but also
so interesting to watch. Like, Dakota Johnson is openly shitting on it, and Sydney Sweeney is defending it, and it's just like, I wonder what the what the group chat looks like.
She did on the Saturday Night Live section when Sydney Sweeney hosted. She said, "You definitely didn't see me in Madam Web." So she's also kind of taking the piss, I suppose. But it's interesting to see that she's expressed interest in working with Martin Scorsese and doing more serious dramatic stuff. So wow. I want to see what you feel about where Immaculate stands, and also, an actor kind of trying to break out of their image, because Kristen Stewart has done that very successfully. I mean, Love, Lies, and Bleeding is still just now in cinemas. So I'm not against actors kind of breaking out of their image.
Sidebar, Josh, have you seen Love, Lies, Bleeding?
I haven't yet. I almost went to see it last night, but I couldn't find a good seat.
Okay. I'm
looking forward to it. I hear good things from people that I don't usually wouldn't have expected to hear good things from. So
yeah, I'm not a big it's weird because like my best friend is very much like you, like in love with horror. Also, I'm starting to think this is just something about you horror fans. It makes sense, yeah, because he really hates to watch trailers. And I guess that makes sense if you're a fan of horror because like too often the best moments are given away in the trailer whereas like if I just like to follow the Oscars primarily, so like the trailer for Sing Sing just came out. Sing Sing, by the way, also played at South by Southwest. I know you didn't attend.
Couldn't get a
But
seat.
like
I tried to go yesterday, but it was sold out.
I have no objection to the big moments being featured in the trailer because that's just like warming me up for all the emotion. But obviously, if you're going to a horror movie, the expectations are different. You want to get something slightly different out of that experience. So I don't know. Maybe this aversion to trailers is common amongst you.
I would say, yeah. I'm not particularly averse to them, but I know a lot of my horror brethren and other critics who focus on horror, they'll close their eyes and plug their ears. They'll walk out when the trailer starts playing.
Literally what he does, yeah. And it's weird because he always wants to get to the theater like in time for the trailers, but then he spends most of his time sitting there with plugging his ears and closing his eyes. But I was bringing this up because like I don't belong to that cohort. However, like some sort of genre mashups that I really like, if you can group Titan under that heading, I think this movie appealed to me in many of the same ways, where it's like you have the body horror elements, but it's just mixed with like a really swoony kind of romantic vibe and like the colors and the music and the familial connections. It's like it really is possible to watch that movie and get something and get a lot out of it without being that. Maybe why you're hearing good things about it from people who normally don't like that sort of movie, because it's just like a really fun kind of hangout romance.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it looks fun, and the trailer, as you were mentioning, the trailer is that whole thing is that Bronski Beat song, and I love Bronski Beat, and so that song playing through the trailers just got me right away. So that's my age showing right there. But that's a great song, and any movie that uses it probably has a little bit of me on its mind. So I'll take it.
And Varad, I think that's an example of like, I don't know, if magical realism is becoming more prevalent in genre films, like, yeah, the ending of Love Lies Bleeding definitely falls into that.
Thanks for ruining that. Now I don't want to go into the theaters. Cool. Good on you.
I mean, okay,
good job.
Sorry, was that a big spoiler? I thought that was just like such a bit like a teaser.
Yeah,
just saying like this is a style it dips into. I'm not telling you anything specific about that. It's another thing, and you're not a genre fan, but yeah, horror people. So I mean, everyone hates spoilers. I'm a freak who, for some reason, invites them. Like when we get to Civil War, I'll edit the stuff out. But Josh, please spoil the shit out of it for me. Like, I guess,
okay.
And I know that people who are okay with spoilers, the justification they usually give is the one I'm about to offer. Like, I don't care what happens. I want to see how it happens. Like, give me the description so I can start like picturing what the shots will look like, and then I want to see the movie and determine like how closely my like visualizations match. Anyway.
Well, before we get to Civil War, I want to talk about, I was going to say Sydney Sweeney, but I'm going to say Sydney Sweeney. Because, well, Immaculate is coming out within a week in Australia, so probably the closest film in theatrical release here. So, and I want to see, I think the vibe seems pretty, what I'm expecting from the trailer is pretty consistent from what I think I want to get from this sort of movie. And yeah, I want to see if an actor, because of that crossroads element that I previously pointed out, I think this could go either way, where she can have an alternate career, or sort of beginnings of one where she's trying to reinvent her image, or it could go in a totally different direction. What did you think? What were your feelings going into the film, and what did you feel?
I'd seen a trailer before, but I hadn't read too much about it. I know that it had screened once before. We saw the world premiere, but it had another sort of secret screening in LA a few weeks ahead of time, where all the participants had to sign NDAs, so no one was able to talk about it afterwards. And so you'll see some of I think one of the trailers was like people coming out of that screening and talking about like, oh my God, this was whatever. But I think Sydney Sweeney acquits herself very well. This was a passion project for her, and you can definitely tell that. If you read any of the background of it, it was a script that she'd had in her hands for years, and then finally kind of had gathered the clout to actually make it happen, and made it happen. And I think I also, as a fan of genre film, one of the billions of like sort of subgenres and tiny little niches that exist is the nunsploitation film, which is bad things happening in convents. And this definitely fits the bill of bad things happening in convents. And there's the elements of religious horror. There are lots of things. I don't want to spoil it. I mean, there's by the title alone, you can kind of, if you think about it for 15 seconds, you can figure out something that's going to happen in the film. But I think her performance is very solid. She has her character must evolve throughout the film from being a very sort of quiet milquetoast, novice nun to sort of fighting for herself and fighting for her own autonomy through various nefarious machinations. She is robbed of that autonomy and then has to sort of fight to get it back, and against people who have very deep pockets, and they have the support of the church in order that are focused on keeping her down. And so she puts in a performance that I haven't seen Euphoria, I will say, but I have seen White Lotus, and I've seen her in some other things, and I get the vibe that she's put out in films before, and there is some of that she does. And this is no, I mean, not, I won't say no shade, but maybe minimal shade on her. She does have sort of the sort of dead Gen Z eyes that a lot of actors and actresses have, the sort of aloofness that I think plagues a lot of actors of that generation. Kristen Stewart, from in a lot of her work sort of capitalized on that. I mean, shit, that woman made her career, started, becoming a huge star with those Twilight movies, and she does nothing. Like, there's just nothing going on behind the eyes in those movies. But she's a good actress. It took the right material to get it out.
It's got more to do with Twilight. You watch her in Adventureland, she's doing that really like expressive, fidgety stuff.
That's what I'm saying.
Characterizes her best work now.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And I think that Sydney Sweeney
came out 2009, and the first Twilight movie was 2008, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so around the same time. But I think also once that first Twilight movie came out, she was probably just getting the paycheck for the rest of those movies because she signed a contract. She's got to get through them, and it's not really where her heart was. And I feel like with Immaculate, Sydney Sweeney has a film where her heart is, and so she's giving her all, and she's actually using that sort of the expectations that one might have of her, having seen her previous films, to her advantage. And you see her character evolve in a way that I don't know that she's been able to do. There's a certain kind of acting that you must give in order to be successful in a horror movie, or put forth a successful performance in a horror movie. You have to give up a lot of vanity in order to do that in a lot of cases. And this is one of those cases where you have to like give in to what the movie is expecting in order to in order to really get over the finish line and be convincing. And I think that through the last act of the film, which, if you read any reviews or whatever, a lot of them talk about that final act of the movie and how it goes, off the rails. That's where she does her best work, because she is, capital A acting again, and the film kind of goes there with her. I've read, after I wrote my review, I read a few others, and not everyone was as convinced as I was, but I really, really enjoyed it. And this is something that I don't know that the that the producers were necessarily intending, but I felt that it had a very ingratiating silliness to it. Once it gets to the end, and the way things happen is just sort of outlandish and over the top. And there are just some elements of the film that are, you look at that, and I saw some of the moments happening toward the end of the film. I was like, that's ridiculous, but I'm in. Like, if you can sell this little thing that you've built here, and you can sell it to me, then I'm good. And they did. Because there are some ridiculous moments in it, and I like that. I like ridiculous moments in a movie, and I like it when the characters don't realize they're in a ridiculous movie, and they act as though it's serious. And I think that's one of the things the film does well.
Yeah, I think now we have the big three left in terms of our most anticipated. How are we going to tackle this, Ron? Do you want to pick Sasquatch Sunset?
Well, before we talk about those three,
okay,
I want to quickly discuss a movie I know you haven't seen, Josh. But maybe you can sort of tell me if you've been sensing or hearing any buzz, because I didn't get to see. I saw the TV glow. Oh, that's an awkward construction. I missed. I saw the TV glow at Sundance, but every line I was in had people talking about it. Would you say that's held for South by Southwest?
It was a very buzzy screening, and it was hard to get into. It was one of those, because it was one of the headline screenings. Those typically at South by Southwest. At a lot of film festivals, you'll have, the film will screen early in the festival, and then they'll have, later screenings for, later on in the festival, where maybe the talent isn't there anymore, but they still want to show the film. And so at South by Southwest, TV Glow was not one of those. It had one screening and one screening only. And after that screening, if you missed it, you're just kind of out of luck. And there were a lot of people talking about it. There's always, of course, quite a bit of carryover from Sundance, the industry people that are going from festival to festival doing their business. So I did talk to a lot of people who had seen it at Sundance, and then I talked to people who saw it there at South by, and the consensus was overwhelmingly positive. I will say that I did see James Schoenbrun's previous film and wasn't a huge fan. And I talked to a lot of people that also said they weren't a huge fan to the World's Fair. I talked to a lot of people who did see that film and also weren't a big fan of that one, but then really enjoyed TV Glow. So I don't know if it's that different of a film, or if it's just that the evolution in her talent has led to better product, a more refined final product. Or if it's just objectively a great film. But I've heard such good things that I'm really excited to see it, and I was kind of bummed that I wasn't able to get a ticket ahead of time, and so I went ahead and scheduled another screening at the same time, because I didn't want to. I knew the line was going to be ridiculous, and there's always a chance that I just don't get in, and I don't want to. The travel part made it not very enticing for me to go out all the way to that theater and then not get in, because then I'm just be stuck in the middle of downtown, and I didn't want to do that. So, but I kind of also gauge that on the fact that I know I'm going to get a release for the film, or the film's going to be released, so I'll be able to see it again somehow. Like Neon will, or who is it, A24?
A24, yes.
A24 will release it, so I'll see it then.
Yeah, I think it's due the first week of May. So
yeah, soon.
Excited.
So soon.
That's still I'm an impatient one.
Yeah,
I'm like, if I have an opportunity to see something 2 weeks early, like, and like I think Dune Part 2 was having like a special IMAX screening. It wasn't IMAX, it was FOMAX. It's like my local Regal. And I have, like you, I have a theater membership, and but for IMAX I have to pay a surcharge. Did I care that seeing it a few days early would cost me $7? Like, no, I'm just, my point
yeah,
is May 3rd seems like really far away, and I wasn't excited for the movie based on what I was hearing. What got me excited was that trailer. There are some striking images in there.
yeah,
Like on a casino floor, and just like the colors are really like, they're not too vibrant. They're also a little kind of like desaturated and ominous, and I'm really excited to see
yeah.
like that film's visual presentation.
I
Okay,
get
yeah.
it. I'm
Now we can
same way.
move into
Yeah,
the top
yeah.
three.
I
The
guess yeah,
one
moving away
I'm
from horror to something completely different now. Yeah.
the one I'm most excited to talk about in this set is Civil War. And I know that's probably the buzziest premiere. What do you want to talk about first? Monkey Man or Sasquatch Sunset?
Let's do Sasquatch Sunset, Monkey Man, and let's save Civil War
I
for
think I'm
us.
more excited for Sasquatch Sunset than Monkey Man, but fine, let's
Ouch, ouch. I'll take that personally, but it's okay.
Well,
I
these last three films,
Sasquatch
these last three.
Sunset is an Oscar contender. Makeup baby. Like they really hit Jesse
Who cares
Eisenberg.
about the Oscars? Who cares? It's fine.
Guy. This guy.
Okay, so all three of those films I really really liked, which doesn't always happen. I part of the thing with going to South by Southwest is sometimes I'll have a relatively big release, have its world premiere, and I'll walk out and just like not really vibe with it. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's happened to a significant extent a couple of times. The remake of Pet Cemetery, I really didn't like right off the bat. Uh, there was they also had The Curse of La Llorona, which I thought was really terrible as well. So sometimes those big premieres of the films that already have releases set are a crapshoot. Sasquatch Sunset, I think I'd seen a trailer for with my wife at some other screening we were at, and it looked interesting, and so I decided to go check it out, and I loved it. I thought it's a very touching, it's emotionally resonant film. There's obviously no dialogue because they are just literally a family of Sasquatches just doing their thing. Um, but it's it's heartfelt, it's funny, it feels real, like the performances are great. Everyone, again, because there's no vanity in this film. There can't be, because you can't see anyone's faces. They're not, that's not part of the project. They have to put all of their efforts into the physical performance, and they really really do. Jesse Eisenberg and Christoph, the who plays the son, the Sasquatch son, and then Nathan Zellner, who's co-director and then also plays one of the Sasquatches in the film, and Jesse, and all those. Riley Keough is great in the film as well, and you wouldn't know who any of them were if you hadn't seen their names on the marquee or coming through the credits or anything like that. It's not about them; it's about the story. Um, and it would have been really easy to make a film that doesn't sustain the kind of runtime that a feature film requires. Even a short feature film with no dialogue is a tough call. It's a tough thing to pull off. But they do. And the like I said, the performances, that like you were mentioning, the makeup, the full body makeup is great. Um, it's not. It's a good mix of gags and sight gags, and then also emotionally resonant moments. There's laughter, there are tears, there's all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect in a film like this. And I enjoyed it a lot more than I had anticipated. I really had no kind of uh, preconceptions going in, and I came out and I immediately texted my wife to tell her, like, we're gonna go see this again as soon as it comes out. Like, you have to come. You're gonna love this. And I really, really, really enjoyed it. Um, it's vulgar and gross in all the right ways. You know, if you're thinking about it's a family of Sasquatches in the woods. You know, Sasquatches in the woods got to do some stuff. You know, their life is not all clean and sanitary, and they don't shy away from any part of it. You know, and I think it's really, really fun, and I think people are going to really enjoy it when they finally get a chance to see it.
That's fantastic. Not that it was on my list, but Ron, I hope it satisfies your curiosities because
I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, it's another movie that came out at Sundance. I didn't hear as many raves about that as I did about like I Saw the TV Glow and even It's What's Inside. I think like those were I think I Saw the TV Glow was sort of being talked about as like the premium horror offering, like
Mhm.
the top billing, and It's What's Inside was like your like the best kind of experience if you were
It's a
looking for.
popcorn movie. Like, it's a great popcorn
Yeah.
horror movie. You know, and Sasquatch Sunset is. I mean, it's rep by Bleecker Street, who they're a boutique distributor, and it's kind of they've been picking up bigger and bigger films. I mean, like last year they well, I guess it was last year or earlier this year they did ISS, which feels like a big
Yeah.
movie. Like, it feels like the kind of film that needs to be a big movie that I really enjoyed. I know it didn't get a whole lot of play or a whole lot of reaction from critics, but I thought it was good.
Movies
And
that
this is
premiere at Tribeca just don't like Tribeca. I could be mistaken, but they have yet to have their everything everywhere moment, like that movie that sort of launches them into the stratosphere. I kind of thought maybe if Eric LaRue came out and Judy Greer got some Oscar traction that they could like explode. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But Sasquatch Sunset, I think, is really going to surprise a lot of people. I think it's something I'm going to be going back to. There are still moments in the film that I think about pretty frequently, even though I just saw it like a week ago or less than a week ago. There are still things that come back in my mind, and I just kind of chuckle to myself because there's a lot of like really great gags in the film, but there's also at least a couple of points where like there's genuine tragedy in this family's life, and like you feel for them, and they just got to keep on trucking. They are animals, and so they can mourn the dead, but only for so long because they got to keep going. And it's a really, really solid film that I think is going to surprise folks.
Yeah, the more I hear about it, I don't know, it sounds like my kind of thing. Also, just so I have to bring everything back to Oscars. Yeah, you did mention Bleecker, and one of their, relatively big titles recently was Golda, which got
Mhm.
best makeup nomination for all the
Yeah.
cake on Aaron's face. So yeah, not that that indicates anything about the chances of Sasquatch Sunset, but again, like you look at that full body makeup and like you really too often we like I know this past year just annoyed the shit out of me anytime people were like Robert Downey Jr. was unrecognizable in Oppenheimer, and it's just like no, you're bad at recognizing people. But or like, sometimes you have heavy makeup, but like even heavier than that. Like I think you can see Mike Myers underneath his Cat in the Hat makeup. I could not tell that was Jesse Eisenberg. Maybe I need to have a second look, but that is some impressive stuff. And I think it'll just be
Yeah.
hard to overlook. And the makeup category, like that branch, is really not like snobbish. Like unlike some of the other Oscar categories, they don't care if your movie's in Best Picture or Screenplay. The Last Voyage of the Demeter was like shortlisted. I mean, Golda was nominated, even though again, like Helen Mirren didn't get a Best Actress nomination, even though something like that is, you know, arguably fodder for the Academy. Anyway, we're off on a tangent. Sorry. Let's bring it back. Okay,
It's all
Sasquatch
good.
Sunset, makeup, really impressive stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Another movie. This isn't quite makeup, but Dev Patel has a striking monkey mask in Monkey Man.
Yeah.
So I
I
guess
mean,
that can serve as our segue.
good segue. Well, Monkey Man is a film that Josh and I we know because it should have come out a long time ago. So that's the only way I can put it, and it didn't. So I'm glad it's finally coming out. But I'm still quite certain it's not going to come out in India where it should come out. But so it's putting me in a very uncomfortable spot, especially with this being election year in India, and the film is coming out in April. It's still slated to come out in India on April 19th. I'm not quite sure how that's gonna play out, but we'll see. We'll see. But yeah,
It'll
Monkey
be
Man.
15 minutes long.
Yeah, that's what I was
Once
thinking.
this,
I was just like, how much of this movie can they actually keep with the censor board? Anyway, let's set the scene. Let's put some context into the movie. Directorial debut of Dev Patel. This movie was ready a while ago, and we'd sort of been hearing about it. Didn't come out. It's finally come out. Two great reviews. Trailer looks badass. It's going to do well, I think, everywhere else except the place it probably should play. And that's sort of, I think, if there's a tinge of sadness that it actually hurts me, it's probably that. It's like the people it's meant for probably not going to be able to see it. And that does hurt a bit.
yeah. And the film it's really remarkable. As you mentioned, it's been completed, or the shooting has been completed for probably at least 3 years now. And it's been sort of sitting around in post-production, and then in sort of distribution limbo, and then in Netflix's catalog for a minute as they were preparing to release it, and then it was not part of Netflix's catalog, and then it got picked up by Monkey Paw. So there's a lot of backstory there, but all the backstory doesn't really matter if the film's no good. And in this case, the film is actually good. And it does a lot of things that I wasn't really ready for. Like, I'd seen the trailer, and I, had some prior knowledge about the film, and it's sort of travails on the way to the screen. As last summer, I was talking to a friend about it who was kind of in the know. It's about a young man who's who makes kind of his living getting beat up in underground street fighting rings. And he is trying he's an orphan. His mother was killed as a result of some, not entirely above board police action, that destroyed his village as a kid. And so he's trying to get revenge for his mother on the person, people responsible for her death in his mind. And in order to do that, he has to fight his way through the upper echelon of Mumbai society. Well, not Mumbai. Yatana is the city they call it in the film, but it's very clearly Mumbai. And it involves high-ranking politicians. It involves religious leaders, religious demagogues. It involves, caste politics, which have always been a touchy subject in India. And even though, constitutionally, caste doesn't exist in India. Like, it's part of the constitution that caste discrimination is illegal. But that hasn't really stopped anything from happening in a lot of parts of the country. And so, because of a lot of those things I just mentioned, it is almost DOA in India as far as the theatrical release goes, because the board that is responsible for certifying films for release in India is a government. Well, it's not a government operation, but it's a part of the Ministry of Information, I believe, the Information Bureau, I think. And so that group has been very active over the last, at least the last 15 years, probably before that. I mean, that's just as long as I've been paying attention. And they make cuts for political expedience and to keep the peace to films, all the time. And this one is, I mean, they changed the names. It's kind of like an episode of Law and Order. Like, you know what they're talking about. Like, it's very clear what they're talking about. They just can't use the actual names of the characters. Like, so there's really no way to cut around the stuff that would be objectionable in India to make a movie that still makes sense. Now, all of that's behind the scenes kind of political stuff that people in India are going to be bummed about, because there are people there that both really want to see the film and should see the film, and as my mentions on Twitter will show you, think the movie is a piece of shit and they'll never watch it, and it's all a plot by Westerners to once again defame India and turn it into a one giant slum in the eyes of the world. So, but again, the film's great and the action is great. Dev Patel is sort of throwing a lot of things at the film, at the camera, at the audience, visually, in terms of themes, in terms of action, in terms of choreography. He's throwing a lot of things out there, and most of them stick. There's a little bit of a lull in the film in the middle between. There's a big fight set piece in the beginning. There's a big fight set piece at the end, and the stuff in between kind of takes a little longer than it should. But it's still it's not enough to make it concerning, I don't think. And I think people are going to be very interested to see how well Dev Patel acquits himself as an action performer. He's doing a lot of things that you would see in a film like The Raid or John Wick or like these sort of other big, tentpole action films that they're hand-to-hand action films that we see. But he's incorporating new stuff with camera work. He's incorporating new stuff with fighting styles. It's not as sort of, one of the things that John Wick I love John Wick. Lots of people love John Wick. John Wick is great, but a lot of the action in John Wick it feels very choreographed. And even though like John Wick gets his butt kicked and he's bleeding for like, I don't know, the last 9 hours of the movies or whatever, basically started bleeding once his dog died and it just never stopped. In this case, Dev Patel, he does take those hits, but he also, and one of the things that he mentioned in the Q&A after the film was that he kind of wanted to make it that his character fights dirty, and so this is not like there's not necessarily honor in the battles that he's fighting. He's got a target. He's got a revenge target. And so if it takes fighting dirty to get there, he's going to fight dirty. And I think that's something that we don't see out of our heroes very often, certainly not with something like, it's being compared as like John Wick and Mumbai, but John Wick, for all of the other stuff, like he fights honorably all the time. Like that's kind of his deal, and with this film, Kid, we see the unnamed character of Dev Patel, sometimes you have to do things that you wouldn't expect a character who is supposed to be the hero to do, which is for people like me who are, again, genre film fans who want to see, we love the sound of bones crunching. We love, someone's throat getting ripped out. I love, someone getting stabbed a million times. Like all those things are very exciting to watch, and all that stuff happens, in this film. And a lot of it you don't expect. And some of it is because Dev Patel brings a sort of, I don't want to say baggage, but a history of characters that he's played over the years to this character. And you're like, oh, well, I don't see this. I don't see that guy doing this. Like, I don't see, the Green Knight doing these horrible things or whatever.
Actually, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? I thought when seeing the Green Knight that something particularly interesting about it was that the main character was sort of sleazy and pathetic. So that's actually, you're describing his character in Monkey Man. That might be a point of similarity.
Yeah. And the film also does, it incorporates other, sort of downtrodden parts of Indian society. There's a whole section and a big part of the plot is Dev Patel's interaction and relationship with a group of hijras, which are Indian transgender women, who have they've been a part of Indian society for hundreds of years. Like this is not news to anyone who is aware of Indian society. Like they have their own reputation in India, but they're not like surprising. Like the thing, like in the West, in the US, like a lot of this stuff to us, that like the sort of transgender politics are relatively new, like as a broad theme, that people, you know, the Midwest states or whatever, like all these sort of flyover states that people talk about, like that never really were concerned about because it didn't touch them. But in India and other South Asian and Southeast Asian countries and the East Asian countries, like those are things that have been around for forever, and so they just kind of have been incorporated in. And there is a group there, led by a friend of mine. I was very excited for him, Vipin Sharma, who's a very talented Indian actor. Has been a lot of things. For Americans, he was in Hotel Mumbai with Dev Patel, which is another really, really great movie. There's a lot of really cool stuff that does connect the film back culturally to India. That it connects to Indian culture, but doesn't alienate in a way that you don't understand what's happening, which can be a danger when you're setting what is essentially an American film in a foreign country. A lot of the dialogue is in Hindi and subtitled. It's not all in English. So it's going to be kind of I'm interested to see how it does, because, with Monkey Paw and Universal behind it as distributors, it's got a big market. But, it's also got subtitles. So that could be, I don't think that's not been made clear in the trailers or anything. People are going to be walking into a movie with subtitles. So that might be something that people need to get used to. But, I think folks like us will be fine. We're used to that kind of thing.
One of the things I'm intrigued about is this interplay between, obviously you mentioned the different influences. We have John Wick, you have The Raid, which is very Indonesian in its fight choreography. Dev Patel himself is a trained martial artist. I don't know how many people know that, but I hope after this film, they're going to be quite aware of that fact. And also then using Hindu mythology, using the Ramayana, the sort of, Hanuman, monkey god elements, which I thought after that being crossed over with Wakanda and Black Panther and Hanuman being mentioned in that movie, I think a lot of Western audiences would have a lot more context of that. But I think Monkey Man specifically is probably the first film which is presenting that story in a much more Western-friendly way. So that would have been interesting for me, because part of what Ron and I were discussing, I was trying to give Ron some references from Indian cinema about, Mahabharata and Hindu mythology, and they're so rooted in Indian storytelling that, for a Western audience, it becomes kind of like an education piece. So I thought Monkey Man would have been an interesting play on that, which would be, take in familiar Western tropes and put in that fight choreography, but still include that sort of Hanuman going into, destroy the Demon King's army, has those tropes in there, has that kind of broader themes of that storyline and the epic, and it still plays as a Western story, essentially.
And they do smartly use the Hanuman story in Monkey Man. Like it's not all just sort of illusion. It is also explicitly explained who Hanuman is. There's a very brief sort of, description of how the character in the Ramayana, acts, what his place is in the pantheon of Hindu deities. It's not all like, oh, well, Indians will get this. No, it's explained fairly clearly how it all comes together. And like you said, like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, those are both like they're foundational texts in not only the Hindu religion, but just in Indian culture in general. And so it's kind of like, having a story in Hollywood that has, biblical themes. Like I'm an atheist, but if a movie has biblical themes, I get it because I was born here. Like this is a country that is sort of, it's not like, I don't want to say it's like a Christian country, but it's a lot of things that go on around here. Like I celebrate Christmas. It's good that there's an explanation as to who Hanuman is and like how he acts and how his story relates to this story. And it's good that that's there. And it's not pedantic in the film. It's just like, here's a quick explanation. Here's a little visual. Let's go. And it does a good job of tying itself in throughout the film as well.
I think that's sort of what excites me about it. I guess I just want all of this Indian mythology kind of packaged into something that, resembles a blockbuster I'm used to. Virat and I were kind of talking about how, while they're very different films, I presume, we were kind of talking about the possibility of Monkey Man doing for Indian cinema what Everything Everywhere did for Asian cinema. Now I know like RRR was a really big crossover moment, but that's still an Indian. I mean, you know more about this than I do. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's still an Indian film made by Indians for Indians, and this seems much more like Everything Everywhere. It's a film that takes some of those genre tropes, but really integrates them to create like a big like Hollywood spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and I've had people ask me about the film, whether or not, you know, Monkey Man feels, you know, like an Indian film or particularly a South Indian film. It doesn't. It doesn't feel like anything India's doing. It feels very much like it's influenced by the sort of, you know, East Asian action films. Dev Patel himself in the Q&A mentioned a lot, uh, kept going back to Korean action films. Um, in terms of like the intensity of the action and you know the ways that you know Korean films are willing to go places that a lot of other films won't go in terms of you know plot and the extent of the violence, and so that's really more the influence that they were going for. It's those types of films. Having the Hindu mythology and the storyline, I think is helpful. I think that if people go into Hanuman and then or go into Monkey Man and then try and go back into Indian films, find something similar to it, they're going to be disappointed because you know it doesn't exist much. I mean, there are pockets here and there, but nothing with this sustained level of intense violence really exists. Largely because the censor board won't stand for it, um, uh, just because they can get pretty scissor happy when it comes to violence, although less so nowadays. But you know, in the olden days, they probably went a little harder on it.
As sort of like the story of this film's production release, it is sort of riddled with mishaps, but given where it's ended up with Monkey Paw and Jordan Peele backing it, it is I mean, it's more than a silver lining, right? It's like had this movie not, you know, offended um conservative Indian politics, you know, Netflix would not have had a reason to back away from releasing it. And I know I personally I wouldn't be nearly as excited for this movie had it just been like some Netflix thing.
For me, I'm glad the film is getting released in theaters because there was a point in time where I thought the film will never see the light of day. I think that would have been the worst outcome. It doesn't matter what the content of the film is. Ideologically, I don't agree with what's happening in terms of where movies are going and in terms of how difficult it is becoming for directors to release movies and the content in their own way, in the vision that they've created. So I think that is the basic struggle. And as programmers, we try to champion the director's vision at all times. And to see that and see other filmmakers struggle with it, especially if you have an affinity to Indian cinema, and to see them having to compromise on their vision time and time again in this kind of political outlook just makes it depressing to do our jobs day in, day out. That's probably the best way I can put it. So I'm just happy that the film is getting a release, whether or not it sort of gets a release in India. That's, you know, I'm happy it'll be out there in the world for people to check out eventually. On to Civil War, which is, I think, equally contentious, if nothing else.
It's not that I'm so excited for Civil War. It's just, you know, a lot of times during a festival when the M word gets thrown around, you can write it off as just, you know, festival goggles. But I don't know, something about like it's not just the intensity of the reaction, but like given where some of these reactions are coming from, yeah, like I don't know. Is Civil War the real deal? I know that with most movies, like, yeah, critics see it or at least I saw a funny tweet. It's like first audiences at a festival, masterpiece. Critics, Good, not great. Regular audiences, meh. Film Twitter, this is the worst shit ever. Um, not every movie follows. Not every movie's reception follows that or can be broken down in that way. Basically, I'm asking, like, is Civil War just another case of people hyping something out of a festival? I suspect it's not. What says you?
I mean, I really enjoyed it, but uh I am going to be interested to see how it actually performs and is received by audiences uh once it releases next month, right? It's next month, I think. Um
April 12th, I believe.
yeah. Because I mean, if you're like me and you've been to the cinema several times in the last couple of months, you've seen the Civil War trailer. I've seen it multiple times over the last few months. And it was the trailer selling me a war movie, and Civil War is not really a war movie. Like I feel like there's some critics who are talking about it as if it is, and I wonder if I watch the same movie as them sometimes, because it's not. And I've also seen the movie called an overtly political movie, and I've seen people say that it's avoiding politics at all costs. And like, it's one of those that it kind of depends on what you bring to it is what you're going to come away with. For me, the film it wasn't about the politics. It was about the character. It was about characters being put in tense situations. There are moments where politics shine through, but if just like the basic outline is that the United States is at the end of a civil war. It's not in the middle of it. We don't see where the Civil War started. We don't see the middle part of the action. We don't know why these parties are fighting each other. All we know is that there are three factions. There's the Western Front, which consists of the secessionist states of California and Texas. There's some sort of Florida alliance that is mentioned but doesn't really play a part in the film, and they are fighting against the central federal government based in Washington D.C., and they are closing in. That's where the film begins. It feels like it's at the end of a long conflict. And again, politics are not really mentioned. We don't know if you're familiar at all with American politics. Texas and California have very different politics from each other in general, and so the idea that both of those states would be secessionist states has been floated by people in both of those states, but for very different reasons and at very different points
That's
of time. You know,
that's actually one thing you're talking about, like how some people have claimed like it really tries to depoliticize I mean, even though politics are inherent to it, it's not trying to make any like overt references to like the
right?
actual political landscape. And that's one thing, like that by creating a scenario in which California and Texas join forces, that's like Alex Garland explicitly saying, like, I'm not trying to play partisan politics here. Like,
Right.
this isn't about the actual situation in America.
And it's absolutely not. Like it's clear that there are moments in the film where it's about these four journalists who are attempting to get from New York to DC. Like that's the whole film. They want to get from New York to DC to interview the president. That's the whole movie. They have to take a circuitous route because of the devastation that is, we're at the end of this war, so a lot of the country is in ruins. And it's about the relationships between the four people, the 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 people that they occasionally encounter on their trip, even though most of the trip is just desolate because people are in hiding or whatever. And it's about the way the relationships between these four people evolve, and also the way the people themselves individually evolve along the way as different things come to light, as different things happen to them, and how they change. And it's about, in my mind, the thing that I took away from it, and this could be, I mean, it is, I've read other reviews that don't mention this at all, but it's what struck me was it's Kirsten Dunst's character as a photojournalist, a war correspondent photojournalist, and it's about how her character uh, changes from being this sort of dedicated, objective eye for the people, uh, into something else, something sort of more quote unquote human, as the film progresses, because she's sort of like, she's got this like, it's brilliant. Her performance is one of my favorites in a long time. She has perfected this sort of 1,000-yard stare that you hear about from veterans all the time, where they've been in conflict, and the kind of the only way they can get through it is they sort of develop this stare where they're like looking through things, because they've just seen so much. There's no way they can focus on small things. They have to focus on the bigger picture, and it sort of, it deadens the soul a little bit. It sort of deadens the emotional part of the body that you can't succumb to in those moments. And she kind of has that same aspect to her. And then Kaylee Spaney plays a young aspiring photographer who sort of weasels her way into this caravan to DC, and they have this sort of interplay between each other as the veteran versus the new kid. And then there's of course another writing correspondent who is a sort of an adrenaline junkie, and there's an older correspondent who's looking for like his sort of last big story or whatever. But it's about it's the interactions between them. It's about how the war and reporting on these terrible things and observing these terrible things and sort of absorbing all of those images over years and years and years of conflict, how it affects them on a cellular level, and whether or not the correct course of action is to, at what point does being that objective observing eye, is that not enough anymore? That's what I took out of it, because there are points in the film where they're watching these terrible things. They're in the middle of all these gun battles, which are expertly shot. It's very jarring to watch a lot of these battles, because you're in the firefight with the characters, with the combatants who are sort of side characters, and then the photographers and the writers who are in there with them, because that's their job. And half the time you kind of feel like ducking, because you see their bullets flying past you constantly. The film has a tremendous scope that Garland hasn't. I mean, in his films so far, and in fairness, none of his films have really required a giant scope. And I don't think I'm unusual in that I'm sort of hit and miss on Alex Garland's films. He's done some stuff that really worked for me, and he did some stuff that I was like, what was that bullshit? Like, that was like, I hated Men. I hated it, because the whole movie felt like it was trying to tell me how smart it was, and I was like, you don't need to tell me how smart you are. Just be a movie. If your movie is good enough, I'll get it. You don't have to like tell me how smart. Anyway. This film is a much more straightforward narrative.
I agree.
But
I'm not a Men fan. However, do you like Annihilation?
I like Annihilation. Civil War and Ex Machina are sort of fighting out for the top spot in my Alex Garland list right now. But I'm a simple man. I'm a simple man of simple tastes, and I'm also not that bright. So sometimes a film, if it gets too complicated, I can check out. Or, I'm like, why was this all really necessary? And I feel like Civil War it's a very straightforward narrative. It tells you what it is. There's there are philosophical pieces to it, but you could enjoy it without, engaging, neck deep in those philosophical pieces. But again, I think it's going to be challenging for a more mainstream audience, just because it's not the film. It's not selling what it says it is on the tin. It's giving you a different thing than what the trailers are trying to tell you it is. Which, if you know that it's an Alex Garland movie, and you know who Alex Garland is, and you are sort of a film fan, then that's kind of fine, because you're going into it understanding that there's more behind this, and then you're sort of more open to that. But if I'm going in, like, I think I probably saw this trailer before I went and saw the last Aquaman movie, like, that's not the right audience for this movie at all. It's 99% of the people in that theater are going to see that and be like, oh, it's a war movie. I like war movies. I'll go check that out. And then they're just going to be fairly disappointed. But I thought it was great. I really, really did enjoy it. I think technically it's his most accomplished film. I think the production design is great. The way that they represent, a post-war or late war U.S., the devastation that is wrought. It's different, seeing the kind of devastation across our own country that we often only see in news reports from other countries, often because we put it there in fair play, But it does hit different, seeing high school football stadiums or whatever that might be, suburban neighborhoods that are on fire, or fucking, shopping malls that have been destroyed, things that look like things that are like not too far from my house than it does, parts of the world that I've ever been to. So it's going to be challenging for an audience, but I think the right audience is really going to respond to it.
And some of the style is like deliberately detached, right? Like when I'm watching the trailer, some of it does look like it's meant to emulate documentary footage.
Mm-hmm.
Is that does that describe accurately?
It does at times, but I feel like more often than not, it's attempting to have you, the audience, feel the same sort of danger that these people are willingly putting themselves into when they are doing this sort of war photography. Those images that we see, they're the most harrowing, the most affecting, the ones that go viral, the ones that end up defining moments or defining conflicts for people around the world. Those were taken, in very hostile conditions. And this is showing you like what it takes to get into those hostile conditions and what it's like in those places. I thought that was one of the most impressive sort of technical aspects was showing the way that these battle photographers, it's not a documentary, but it feels real. Like it feels like they're in danger, and transitively like we're in danger, because the camera is sometimes in those very active sequences, the camera is as skittish as we would be in that same position. So it is a perspective that I think is very interesting.
Some of the shots in the trailer have reminded me of Steven Soderbergh's Contagion. I know people are comparing this movie to Apocalypse Now and even Children of Men, but Contagion is the one I keep coming back to. Just like something about like these very kind of barren and like wide images of empty streets. And when you consider that Contagion came out in 2011, like 9 years before, that thing happened. I don't know. It's like that's kind of like a frightening movie to compare it to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that also goes back to the other thing I was saying about how, Apocalypse Now is a comparison that, I wish I had thought of right off the bat, but it is very apt for the film. I heard people talking about it immediately afterwards, and I felt like an idiot for not coming out with it myself. But it is a very apt description of the kind of story that Civil War is trying to tell. And I think Contagion, the comparison to Contagion is apt, but it also does kind of go back to the idea that, we're not unaccustomed to seeing devastation, but we are certainly unaccustomed to seeing it in places that look like places we live. And Contagion did bring that kind of energy, those kind of visuals that, we weren't used to seeing. I mean, it's similarly to something like, in a smaller way, but something like 28 Days Later, 20 years ago, did something similar. Those empty London streets that you would not expect to see. The people in the UK, I remember at the time when I went and saw 28 Days Later in the theater, and the discussions coming out around that time were talking about, how jarring it was to see those empty streets and how complicated it was to like shoot sequences with Cillian Murphy in those at that time. And they had to like schedule it very precisely because they can't just shut down central London for a movie shoots. They had to like take 30-minute intervals or whatever to shoot those sequences. But it is those kind of, we are not accustomed to seeing that kind of devastation in Western countries, because we generally see that in places that we think of as as third world countries or lesser than or places where those people are accustomed to it. And so seeing it in a place that looks like home is very shocking, and this film does it well. I mean, obviously a lot of it is computer generated, but it's done well. I think the production design in the practical locations they do have is very good. It helps you to understand the chronological point in the conflict that the film is taking place, because it's not, a lot of the devastation is not new, and it's obvious that has been some time past where certain spaces have been abandoned to, they're just lost, like they're no-go zones. You can't go there because that place was destroyed or whatever, and it's open land or whatever, not places you want to get caught. So, I mean, there's a lot of things working for the film that help to create the environment that it's trying to express.
Yeah, one of the things it's interesting.
I wanted to include this movie on our list of 2024's most anticipated. You were very opposed. How do you feel now, given this reception?
No, because I fell in the trap what Josh was talking about. I hated Men.
Thinking it's going to be a war movie.
I hated Men. I was mixed in annihilation. My favorite is douche ex machina, for want of a better word. But Alex Garland is like hit and miss. And then, given his propensity of his last movie, I'm just like, is he going for the lowest hanging fruit? I hope not, but the trailer is giving me that vibe, where it's exploiting exactly the kind of situation that I don't want the movie to actually make. And I'm just like, do I want to see this movie? Hell no. Do I want to even give my money to this kind of movie? Probably not. So I was just like, this is not the movie for me. I probably know from this trailer, it probably is a movie for a certain kind of audience. But now, hearing everything about it, this probably is a movie for me and not those people. So I've been like, it's a nice rope-a-dope. I've been duped. So there we go. Thank you, Alex Garland. I guess you're smarter than I thought you were.
Tell that to his marketing people, man. Get a trailer that shows what the movie's like. That's like I said, that's gonna be a challenge, I think. The reactions have been a little bit mixed. There have been, I think, what I've seen as far as, again, after I wrote my review, I went and looked at a few others just to see what the vibe was, and there's people that just really, really didn't like it, and I was curious about why, and so some of their reasoning is specious, in my opinion. I think a lot of them are. A couple of them who rated it poorly were looking at it through a very particular lens, and it didn't fit that particular lens. And I think that's not the way I want to go into movies. There were some reviews that were talking about, the treatment of certain segments of society. And I was like, you can't go into a film with that kind of like, this is the only thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for these kind of people to be treated properly in the movie. Like that's a losing game. It's not a way to appreciate films, in my opinion. Like you need to go in there and try and meet the film where it is. If films are successful or unsuccessful based on their intentions, I think. And I think this film's intentions and its outcome are aligned. And so that's a successful movie.
That's interesting, because I do feel we are kind of in the the zeitgeist of where we are today. A lot of movies are just judged on the internal morality of what they are supposed to encompass and what people project their internal morality onto the movie. And just like, what the movie is doing is unmatching my internal morality. Hence, I hate this film. I'm just like, well, you didn't approach the film as a film. You approach it as your own project, per se, and you were just projecting what you want the film to be instead of what the film is, essentially. So, yeah, I think that's a fair.
Reminded by what you just said of like some of the reactions to Triangle of Sadness, and how certain people were just like, oh yeah, it's an Eat the Rich movie, that's great, I love it. And it's like, right, because there are so few Eat the Rich movies. It's like, isn't it a little bit more important to borrow a Roger Ebert truism, isn't it more important how the movie is about something rather than what it's about? Because I mean, if you just like eat the rich movies, there's a lot of trash you got to throw in there. So definitely, I don't think anyone
No,
here is for coming to a movie and just judging its quality based on how well it espouses your ideology. And Josh, when you said that you read some negative reactions and you found the logic specious, would you say that all of these most of these negative reactions, that the problem they, or rather it seems the source of their problem with the film is an effort to like judge it through the lens of actual politics? Would you, I don't know, maybe I need to rephrase that question, but if you understand what I'm asking, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's fair, and in some cases, those were the negative reactions I was seeing. You know, the one I immediately coming out of the screening, because so just in terms of the timeline, there was a screening at 6 p.m. on Thursday. There was the official world premiere at South by Southwest, at one of the regular South by Southwest venues. But then for press and a select group of industry folks, there was a an IMAX screening an hour later at another venue in town. And so, I had inquired about getting a seat for the premiere, and the PR person told me at the IMAX screening, and I was like, well, sure, I'll do an IMAX instead of the other screening. And so, because of that, as we were getting out of our IMAX screening an hour later, there had already been an hour worth of responses from the other screening. And so coming out of that, the credits play all the way through, and then the cast and Garland come out and do their Q&A, and we're paying attention, but there's also a lot of phones popping up and like going on Twitter and Letterboxd or whatever, and like typing away and just checking to see what the reactions were. And some of them, like one of the things I saw was from someone saying like, "Oh, have any have any critics who are people of color responded to Civil War, because I'm seeing some things." And I was like, okay, I'm a critic and a person of color, so let me go see. Like, that never crossed my mind, and during the course of the film, like that was not. I mean, sure. I mean, once I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, most of the major characters in the film are white. Sure, right? There's a few characters of color in the film. One of the main or one of the supporting characters, one of the four leads, I will say,
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Played by Stephen McKinley Henderson.
There's a couple of other like sporadic characters through the film. I mean, most of the characters are white, but I was like, okay, is that what you're like? Is that what I'm looking for? Like that there's only one of the main four is a non-white person? Because okay, sure, like yeah, that's a thing if you want to look at it. I mean, the writer is Latino as well, so I mean, there's two people of color in the van. He's, I think, Venezuelan or something like that. He's South American. And I was like, okay, is that it? And then I was like, that got me thinking. I was like, okay, well, what did I miss? Am I a bad brown person because I wasn't offended by this movie? Because sometimes they can make you feel that way. Was I supposed to be offended? Shit, I missed it. Like, was there something good?
When you read those
and one thing that happens,
do you at least have an idea of like what they're referencing? Like, is there a specific moment that you can kind of look at and be like, okay, I guess if you want to read it that way, you could. Or like,
yeah, I mean, the thing is,
find it baseless and you have no idea what they're talking about.
Here's the thing, is if that's what you're focused on, if that is your focus going into the film, is how are people of color going to be treated in this film, then you tend to exclude the treatment of everyone else because you're focused on that one thing, right? And yes, the movie is brutal and people are killed left and right. It's a war movie, I say it's not a war movie. There's a war happening in the movie, and people are getting killed because that is what's happening. It's not about that, but it happens in the course of the action, right? and some of those people are not white, and a lot of those people are white, and there's people that are killed haphazardly. Like if all I was focusing on was the people who are not white, then yeah, I'd be like, oh man, it seems like a lot of non-white people got killed in this movie. I'm like, this is true. But a lot of other people got killed too. Like I don't think that they are treated particularly poorly, or that there's any sort of, leaning in any one direction or the other as far as like who gets it the worst. That's what I'm finding specious is the the requirement that I feel a certain way about one character being treated poorly to the exclusion of all other characters in the film, just because of one thing or one aspect of who they are. It feels like you're missing the forest for the trees at that point,
Just to kind of give that argument the benefit of the doubt, could you see someone argue? I mean, I know you said there's no real leaning, but more specifically, would you say that the violence that happens to non-white characters is in any way like more brutal, or that's a totally like baseless claim?
I mean, there may be one or two particularly egregious instances of violence that happen to take place against people who are non-white. But again, I think that in several of the cases where, or I won't say several, in a couple of the cases, it's as a way of depicting the horror inflicted by the aggressor. It's not an indictment by the film. It's an indictment of the villain.
It kind of reminds me of the discourse around Catherine Bigelow's Detroit, where it's like, yeah, these horrible things are being done by the people that this movie is trying to indict. It's like, at the same time, and I don't think Detroit is guilty of this in any way, but at the same time, I can see, and I'm having trouble thinking of a particular movie where this could be alleged to be the case. But like, even if there is occasionally this like special relish that's taken in a particular kind of violence, and like, not that I would necessarily agree with these people, but it becomes sort of easier to see their point. Like if, white characters are just like, shot and, you see some blood splatter, but then there is a non-white character and we just have like a really extended, uncomfortable graphic shot of them being like torn apart by a dog. Then it's like you kind of have to wonder, like, yes, even though we know who the bad guys are in this, it's like, why are we, there's almost a bit of enjoyment being taken in this. There's like an element of exploitation. And I'm not usually the one to make these arguments. I think I usually find myself to the right of Virat on some of the things we talk about. But like, I can see that perspective. I can entertain it and not immediately dismiss it as just the sort of thing that you are very, like, I think, correctly calling out as just this, I don't know if I want to use the term race baiting, but yeah, like just choosing to go into a movie with, just like choosing to go into any film and kind of like the problem with the Bechdel test, right? It's like before it even starts, you're already thinking like, how does this movie short change women? And
yeah, I think the thing that I compared this kind of this sort of like tunnel vision on Twitter was, I don't know if you guys have seen this on Letterboxd. She's probably still there. I don't know if she still is, but there was one person on Letterboxd who every movie they posted like a vegan warning. Like here's a thing that vegans might be afraid, or here's like, oh, they served a hamburger in this movie, like vegan warning, or like, and like every single movie had this vegan warning. Like if you're watching every single movie with that very specific lens. You know, if this is what your deal is, then you're going to miss a lot of stuff because you're so hyper focused on this one thing that you're going to, again, miss the forest for the trees. And I feel like some of these reactions are because, yes, what you're saying is correct. If they do take special enjoyment or spend extra time on particularly viciously destroying, you know, people of color in terms of violence, in terms of sexual violence, in terms of anything like that, then yeah, that's certainly problematic and something that should be called out and addressed. But I don't think that's the case here. You know.
Cool. I think that mostly sums up the
I
spicy
hate
discussion.
to end the conversation with that, but
no,
yeah,
but
I guess we have pretty much talked about everything.
I think we have talked about
Kirsten
everything.
Dunst is great. I love Kirsten Dunst. She's my performance of the year so far. I'll give you that as a positive. I stood about 10 feet away from her at the after party and could not talk to her, and I still am thinking about it. And I regret not telling her how great I thought she was. So there we go.
Cool.
Yeah.
My favorite performance of the year so far is Kristen Stewart in Love Lies Bleeding. Hey,
can't wait to see it.
Oscar nominees for
there you go.
the year in for the films of 2021. 2022 Oscars honoring the films of 2021. Dunst was nominated for The Power of the Dog, and Stewart was in contention for Spencer.
So I'll say two. I'll say Dunst and then Riley Keough and Sasquatch Sunset. Those two.
Cool.
Thumbs up. Riley Keough really goes for it.
Ron, you're really making a beeline for your Oscar prediction. It's just like two Oscar contenders, right?
I don't.
Right. It's been what? It's been 6 days. 6 days since the last Oscars, and we're already predicting the next one.
I've already got my predictions for next year filled out. However, I don't think I'm as reactionary as some of the people on Twitter. I'm not even going to ask you this, Josh, with a straight face because, I'm already seeing Nick Offerman's Oscar campaign starts out. I'm sure Nick Offerman is really good, and if people are even beginning to make that comment, I don't know, he has a couple good scenes in the movie.
He's in 45 seconds of the movie.
Oh yeah, see, you say that, and I'm just it's festival goggles. But yeah, I've heard great things about Spaney. I've heard great things about Dunst, but those reactions were more of kind of what I expected. We're just every new thing. I don't think Dune is getting yes, Dune Part 2 is going to the Oscars. I don't think it's getting acting nominations, and it's just every new thing. And by the way, my second favorite performance of the year is Zendaya's in Dune 2. But yeah, no, I don't think she's going to the Oscars. I hate this knee-jerk reaction. You see a movie that's good and a performance that is, better than mediocre, and it's suddenly we're talking Oscars. I don't think Civil War is headed there. Even if it's a great movie, I just think it's way too far out of that.
I mean, I don't.
That being said, Everything Everywhere, another South by title out of that wheelhouse, went on to do very well.
But if you had told me after watching, like I said, at the premiere of Everything Everywhere, if you had told me that a year later they'd be getting an Oscar, I would have laughed in your face. Not because the movie is bad, the movie is amazing, and not because Michelle Yeoh's not great, because she's amazing, but because it doesn't feel like that wasn't the conversation being had that week, because we all saw it and we loved the movie and we talked to each other about it incessantly. And we're like, this is really, really weird and people are going to like it, but it's going to be a real small limited number of people because it is just so weird. There's no way it's going to go that far. And then it did. When I saw Triple R the first time in the theaters, I thought it was great. And I thought that song was my favorite song in the movie. And there's no way you could have told me he was going to win an Oscar that day or the next month, or when we started releasing it, or by the summertime when we started thinking about an Oscar campaign. That wasn't what we were looking at. And it did. So you never know. Those conversations may start early, but they take really weird turns.
That is true.
Yeah, it's what you have to remind yourself of to balance, I think a healthy cynicism when you see that kind of. I think that should be called Oscar baiting, not the making of, something like Maestro, but rather just suggesting everything as it comes out is, a potential Oscar contender. But yeah, you're right. Everything Everywhere. it's weird. Like this year, we were all, I think, looking at Poor Things and easily predict, and like Barbie. I don't know, without Everything Everywhere, would we ever have taken Barbie seriously as an Oscar contender? It's like, and this happens every year. We say, and I think this is why we continually say that the Academy is boring. It's not that the Academy is boring. It's that once they do something for the first time, that just becomes part of our like conception of normal. So before Everything Everywhere won, like that's insane. I couldn't believe even on the night of, I was just like, there's no way this movie is actually
Mhm.
going to be that successful. But by that point, it had already proven me wrong like a million times because I never thought it was even making it to the party. And then it was at the party, and I'm like, no way it's winning. And then it won everything. And now like and and then I think the next time the Academy does something weird, we're going to be like, oh wow, look, they really bucked like a trend, but we'll just be ignoring all of the other things they did because again, like before Get Out was nominated for Best Picture, that was unthinkable, and then it happens and it just becomes part of the norm, and so we're not giving them, it's almost like we're saying, okay, what's the next weirdest thing they're going to do like the following season, instead of kind of broadening our perspective and thinking, look at how different these nominations are than they were 10 years ago, right? When, I mean, The Imitation Game, and like, I mean, Morton Tilden was one of the 5 directors nominated. Um, yeah, I just think we're in a totally different place, but we're not recognizing it because we're just looking at the nomination pool year to year instead of comparing like 2022 to 2014. And then suddenly you see like, wow, in a decade things have really changed. This is a
Mhm.
segue into like my final question. Um yes, I just railed against people too readily prognosticating the Oscars. Have you seen anything out of this year's South by South? Well, Sing Sing, we know, but that premiered at TIFF, so that doesn't count. Any South by Southwest premieres break out?
I mean, I, I don't think that there's anything quite as revolutionary as Everything Everywhere All at Once was. Um, you know, uh, Somebody actually said something to. I was having a conversation with friends at the festival about the premieres and things, and how one person was saying, and this kind of struck me personally, uh, like South by Southwest is still cruising on that Everything Everywhere juice. Like they're still cruising on the fact that they premiered an Oscar winner, and how long can they go on that? And I was sitting right next to him, like, yeah, my movie won an Oscar in that same ceremony, so I'm hoping we can coast for a little while longer. Because you know,
Also,
I would like.
Everything Everywhere, not their only claim to fame that year. I'm pretty sure To Leslie premiered at that South by Southwest. And,
No,
you know,
that was a
that's also a pretty big feat. I think it was just a weird year, right? Like things that
yeah.
don't normally break through. RRR, Everything Everywhere, a performance like, even though one could argue Andrea Riseborough gives a very Oscar friendly performance, just not in the kind of micro budget movie that gets recognized. But
Yeah.
yeah, so South by Southwest can say it launched a couple of surprise
I mean, I think if anything lands at the end of the game, it'll be something from Civil War, whether it's a technical award, because technically the film is very, very well executed. Uh, I, as much as I like I said, I don't put much credence into this. I do like to see things that I enjoyed win, and celebrating that. If they lose, it doesn't make me feel any less about them. I think Kirsten Dunst's performance is excellent. We already talked about Sasquatch Sunset and the makeup department. That feels like a definite possibility. Yeah, I mean, I think that the technical aspects are where I feel probably strongest about end of year accolades adding up.
I guess with Everything Everywhere, it was also right, as weird as it was, it always came back to that very accessible, crowd pleasing family story. Right. I think that's
Mhm.
why so many people were able to connect to it, even though, you know, butt plugs and weird multiverse stuff is not typical to their film diet. Okay, so let me refine my question a little bit. Did you see anything this year that premiered at South by that has the potential for like major crossover appeal, where it's like this can bring in all sorts of film fans and yeah, just become like this it's I'm almost like I'm limiting you to crowd pleasers, I guess, because crowd pleasers usually are the ones that have the broadest appeal, sort of like in the name, in the term. But yeah, and anything you saw that might appeal to people outside of its target audience demographic.
Um, I don't know. I think Sasquatch Sunset has a chance at finding an audience that it maybe wasn't expecting to find, just because it is so charming and it is, you know, so surprisingly uh emotionally uh resonant with a wordless story. Is I think Bleecker Street knows what they're doing, and I hope that they're able to give the film the kind of push that it needs. I was actually just looking up this afternoon to see if I could buy tickets yet, and they're not quite up yet, but I really want to go see it again. I feel of the ones that feels like a crowd pleaser. Like it feels weird in the same way that Everything Everywhere felt weird.
With a
It's
family story to anchor all
yeah,
of
yeah,
those idiosyncrasies.
yeah, for sure. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of people when it actually does release, and the word starts getting out about it a little more, like in a bigger sense than at a film festival.
You so much. It's been so much fun talking to you because apart from like the deep dive into the festival, it's just good to hang out and talk to you. And for all the people who are watching, the 9 people who will be watching this for 3 hour long conversation, Josh's profile is in the description and all the reviews are there. So please check them out. I'm glad we could coordinate this crazy time difference chat.
Yeah,
This is how I'd like to spend my weekend.
yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks for talking to us. It was nice meeting you. This was interesting. I think we should at some point figure out an excuse to do it again. Maybe when Civil War comes out and we have.
You guys are in the same country. I mean, you guys can have it all the time. I'll have to make the trip, so.
It's not a party without you.
Oh, thanks. All right. See you guys later, and till next time.